Certified Financial Planner is an innovative, comprehensive, informative, and cutting-edge podcast that discusses financial topics ranging from personal finance, economics, politics, and personal growth. Simply Financial will cover intriguing and thought-provoking questions so that the listener can simply increase their financial IQ.
Welcome to the Simply Financial podcast. This is Christopher Calandra, your host. This is Season 4, Episode number 3. On today's episode, we're going to change things up a little bit. In a moment, I'll bring on Lindy Brock, who has worked very closely with me for going on 6 years now. We do a lot of servicing of clients jointly. She's licensed, studying for her Certified Financial Planner designation, and is literally my right-hand man, if you will, even though Lindy is a woman. And so we put together today just some discussion items about when we're meeting with somebody who is not a client, kind of how this conversation goes, what we're looking at, what we're trying to accomplish, how the flow of the meeting, the initial meeting, is likely to go. So Lindy will kind of take the lead in today's conversation, sort of interview me. She does lots of meetings on her own. We do an awful lot of meetings jointly. And then there's some times where I do the meetings, but then she and I do a debrief afterwards. But she's always involved in the process of working with a potential client. So, Lindy, thanks for taking a few minutes out of your busy day to cover this with me.
Sure, Chris.
So I think we had set it up where you were going to interview me. You had some thoughts. I thought it was a great idea. This episode actually is your idea, all cards on the table. So where do you want to begin?
So I wanted to start out because one of the reasons I wanted to do this is for people that haven't been through this process before, and they may have never even talked with a financial advisor. And if they have, they may only have one aspect of the financial world and not really know the financial planning process. So when they walk in the office for the first meeting, like you've already talked to them on the phone and done kind of a small introduction, but they walk in the office for the first meeting. What's it like when they walk in the door, and what is the atmosphere?
So I'll say in most instances, even before this, Lindy, if I'm speaking with a person, I'll explain a little bit up front, even prior to us meeting, that the purpose of this meeting is to exchange information and see if there's a common basis to take next steps, which would be a second meeting. So when the prospect comes into the office for the first meeting, we want to be friendly, casual, want to create a very comfortable atmosphere because we want to have open communication with them. So anything we can do with our verbal cues, our body language, how we could set up the office, including the dynamic of how we sit together in the conference room, is all meant to create a casual, conversational, informal environment where we could have open communication. And we want to, from the get-go, let them know that this is a no-pressure, easygoing environment. We're just going to chat because we want them to be relaxed and open with us so that we could have a productive conversation and a valuable exchange of information. Does that make sense?
Perfect sense. And you gave the answers that I was wanting to hear.
And you've seen this in action,
yeah.
A ton, right? Do I accurately describe what happens when we sit down with somebody who we maybe never met before, or they may have come to one of the events where they've heard us speak?
Absolutely. And you're correct in saying that the main goal is just to make them comfortable and get them to open up. So you get down, you sit down and you have your, small chat to get them comfortable. When you really kind of get down to business, what is your first question to them?
Well, I would say before the first question, I'll always want to tie in how we came to meet. for the most part, Lindy, when we're sitting with somebody who's not a client, they most often came to us either from a referral from an existing client or secondarily from a center of influence like their attorney or their CPA. And in other instances, it may be a group that we sponsor. We sponsor, especially in Florida, several organizations like dragon boat teams, which is a rowing, dance team, bowling team. So sometimes people will come to us and they're part of a group where we have other clients and we have a relationship where we support that organization. So early on, at the beginning, I want to just remind them how we came to be meeting. So if it was a referral from a client, how long have you known so-and-so? We've been working with our client now for 10 or 15 years. I want to build a bond with them and to reinforce that we have some commonality. And it's good for me and it's good for them to just be mindful of the shared relationship that we have, and that early on begins to pull us close together because we're reminded of how we met, and that's where I'll start. And then that will dovetail into, Lindy, some type of an initial question to find out what they were looking to get out of the meeting, like why did they come in? And sometimes I'll take different approaches. Sometimes it'll be a semi-comical, or I think it's comical, well, what made you want to come in and see a financial geek?
Yeah.
And they'll chuckle, and then they'll often say, because I have a problem, or I have an advisor but I haven't heard from them, or I have an account that's not doing well. They'll open up with something that was driving them to take time out of their busy day to come in or to allow us to come to them to sit down and have that conversation. So that's usually the first question, to try and find out early on a little bit of what's motivating them to have this conversation.
Good. So they get that out, and what are some follow-up questions that you have from that? Do you sort of let them ramble and talk and get out their side? Do you respond immediately? What's your reaction to their response?
Sure. It's a difficult question, Lindy, because it's art over science, and there isn't an exact process for this. In the scope of the initial meeting, there is a process. There is information that I do want to get and goals that I do want to achieve to have it be a productive meeting and set the stage for a potential second meeting where we can make a proposal. But the flow of the conversation will be different in each circumstance. So depending on what the answer is to the initial question will help me judge how I want to proceed. And I think, again, this isn't process-driven. This is me having been in the business for 27 years, having done hundreds, if not thousands, of meetings with a variety of people, different ages, ethnicities, economic backgrounds, investment sophistication. But let's talk about some examples. At some point, depending on the question, I may go directly into what we would say is the fact find, because at some point in the meeting, in all likelihood, I'm going to want to find out kind of the nuts and bolts. I'm going to want to find out their date of birth, their income sources, find out about their asset inventory, how much is in the bank, how much do they have in retirement accounts, where are those retirement accounts, are they putting money in, or are they taking money out, are they married, do they have children, are they employed, are they retired, and I'm going to build my fact finder. Now, I'm a little old school at 49 years old. I do this by paper and pen. We have, as you know, Lindy, a formal questionnaire. I know the questionnaire in and out. I know the information I want to get, but I'm not, and you aren't either, even though you don't have as much experience as I do. You have plenty of experience where we're going to get the information that's on the questionnaire, but we don't have to go question 1, question 2. We could jump around, let nature take its course in the conversation. So going back to your question, most often I'll go into some portion, if not all, of the fact find. Again, some more examples. We'll want to find out, do they own a home? Do they have a mortgage, or is it paid off? What's their status of debt? And that's kind of the fact finder part. Then on the softer part of that will be a little bit more of, what are their goals? What are their objectives? What are they trying to accomplish? Do you have enough income to meet your needs in retirement? Do you feel that you're organized? What are some of your goals and priorities? So that's what I'll do. In some instances, though, I'll contradict myself now. In some instances, depending on how they answer the initial question, it may not make sense to go right into the fact find, in which case I'm going to dig in and explore a little bit more of what they told me. So let's use an example, and this happened with a meeting I had recently where the person described that they have a relationship with an advisor and they're not pleased with it. So my judgment in the moment was not to go into the fact find, but to ask some open-ended questions about what was going on in the relationship. How long did it last? Was it ever good, or was it always disappointing? What was it that happened that really caused them to take action and to seek a second opinion? Find out if they're meeting with other people, and how that are they meeting with some of my competitors? What was their experience? So I'll delve into the topic a little bit more. It might seem inappropriate or counterproductive to jump right into the fact find. So that's, again, a little bit of the art. In all likelihood, 2 pathways: either dig into the primary answer to the initial question, or go into the fact find so I could begin getting more information on who they are, where they are, and get an idea of their financial standing. I know that was long-winded, but did I paint a pretty good picture?
A little bit. I think so.
All right.
So now that you jumped into the fact find, I mean, that's a lot of questions, and it's very personal information that, some people don't feel comfortable sharing. Why is that information even relevant or necessary?
I would usually use the example, it's a little like, a medical doctor. The more that we know about their financial situation, and including their views and attitudes about their financial situation, things like what they feel is working, maybe mistakes they've made in the past, gives me as a professional, as well as my team that's going to help me put together a proposal to help them solve their problems, increase the chances that we could help them achieve their goals. So I need this information so that I could make an informed recommendation when the time is right. It's not probably going to be at the first meeting, but by compiling that information, getting a sense of the nuts and bolts, as well as a little bit of who they are, what their goals are, and what's important to them, will allow me to use my technical skill set, my deep experience in financial services and financial planning, to be able to help them improve upon what they've already been doing.
In the off chance that you have somebody that is resistant and doesn't want to give you information, or is just being really resistant, how do you move forward from that?
It's a good question. I think that if someone is listening to this podcast and they don't know you or I, Lindy, they may think that this happens a lot, but it really doesn't happen a lot. And the reason is that there was a purpose on why they took out their time to come meet with us. And most times there's some warmth in the relationship. In other words, they know us somehow. They're typically not going to look in the yellow pages and find us. We do, with that said, meet with an increasing number of people who do searches online and find us. But that's still a minority of the meetings that we're talking about today, Lindy and I. So most times they're going to be open. And going back to the beginning, if we could do what we're supposed to do up front and be casual and conversational, informal, it's a relaxed environment, and we ask them initially, like, what's important, what brought you in, they're not going to be reluctant to share that information. But it does happen. And then again, this is another one of those art over science kind of situations. Candidly, we're sizing up the people we're meeting with to see if they would be a good fit for us as much as we're trying to audition to become their financial planners. We do not take anyone. And it's not that we're so elite or so special. I don't mean it that way. But you can't be all things to all people. The way that we do things is our way, and it works for a lot of people, but not all people. I think I'm good at what I do, and I'm a likable guy, and most people appreciate my approach, but not everybody, and I'm okay with that. So if I think that the person is just being difficult, I may try and end the meeting prematurely and just part ways as friends and not try and hammer away at something that may not be a good fit. More likely, though, I'm going to be curious because they're there for a reason. And if they're reluctant, I will try and use the Socratic method, which is asking open-ended questions, which I do throughout the fact find and the conversation anyway, to try and figure out what their reluctance is. So if it was somebody that just recently had their identity stolen, or somebody had money stolen out of their account from a friend or a family member or even a professional, well, then their reluctance might make a way more sense than somebody who is just being difficult. So I'll ask open-ended questions and try and sort it out and see if we can make some progress in the conversation while still honoring their boundaries. But those boundaries are going to have to come down for us to be able to make the next step. Not because I am being difficult, just because the nature of the relationship in the business is such that we'll need to have enough information to make an informed decision. We are not going to make recommendations in the dark because that's a recipe for steering people into situations that may very well be worse than when they first met us, and we're simply not going to do that.
I agree. And I think it boils down to also is, we like to take the holistic approach to the financial planning, which means that we look at pretty much all aspects of somebody's life. And one time when I encountered this, somebody was really only interested in us handling their investments. And although, that's okay, but we do need more information to be able to make decisions, even if we're only handling investments, because we still have to know time horizons and, how to invest somebody's money. So I agree. I think that's I think it's good to be able to get everything, and like you said, if we have to end it there, then we have to end it there.
And it's also worth noting for listeners that aside from this being our personal preference and our culture at Elliott Wealth Management, how we want to interact with customers and who we want to align ourselves with, that's our view. But separate from our view, we work in a very regulated industry, and there are requirements called Know Your Customer, and there's a minimum amount of information that we need according to the regulators to be in a position to make recommendations. And if we violate the Know Your Customer rule, not only are we not doing right by the customer, which is not what we want to do, and we will not do that, we also are violating the terms of our licenses. I'm a certified financial planner. I abide by a code of ethics put out by the Certified Financial Planner Board, plus with the securities licenses, there's a lot of rules and regulations, and if you run afoul of those rules, you can get in lots of trouble, including getting thrown out of the industry. So it's worth noting that this isn't just something we made up out of thin air. We built broadly upon existing rules and regulations in the industry that are meant to protect the public, and we want to do that because we want to help our clients, not hurt them. So what else do you want to talk about, Lindy?
So you've gathered all this information. Now, what do you do from there? Is that the end of the meeting? Do you make recommendations at that point, or how do you use all of that information that you just gathered?
Yeah, it's funny in thinking about this and in preparing for our discussion, Lindy. Most initial meetings last about an hour, maybe a little over, but typically around an hour. And it is pretty remarkable how much information we gather in terms of actual data, as well as people's goals and personalities and what they're looking to accomplish in such a short period of time. It is pretty amazing. So I want to get that fact find, that information that I mentioned before. I want to focus on the primary reason why they had come in. And I'm not going to make recommendations for the most part in the initial meeting. Our strategy is to have the initial meeting for both parties to exchange information, and then, if agreed upon by both parties, to schedule a second meeting. And at that second meeting is when we will make a proposal on one or more discussion items that were covered in this initial meeting. But with that said, once I uncover some of what they're looking for, what's important to them, what their goals are, what problem they wanted solved that led them to come and sit with us, I want to show off at some point, and I want to demonstrate in this first meeting that we can solve their problem, we can help them, we can deliver on what they're looking to accomplish. So that may be an actual recommendation, or it may be, let me give you a couple of quick examples. And this happened recently with, I think you were on the call with me, with Michelle. It was actually a remote meeting. We weren't meeting in person. And they had come into some money. They had a decent amount of money in the bank, and we were talking, and they had a loan. It was a small loan, a car loan, like $4,000. And so I said something to the effect of, listen, we'll talk more about this in the second meeting, but I don't see any reason why you shouldn't pay off that small loan and just clean it up and get rid of it. It fits into your goals and objectives. So I think that's a no-brainer. We could talk more about it at the second meeting, because I want to show that I hear what they're saying, that I understand what they're trying to do, and that I can deliver on it. I don't want them to leave that first meeting, Lindy, without having gotten something, some type of sense that I'm technically skilled, I understand what they are looking for, and then I could deliver it. Am I going to give a 10-point proposal like I might on the second meeting? No. Am I going to talk about some investment allocation strategy? No. But I am going to I'm going to use the term show off a bit and talk in a way that I could demonstrate that we're technically skilled and I hear what they're saying. And that would increase the chances that they want to schedule a meeting and that they'll feel optimism going into that second meeting that we're going to be able to deliver a good proposal that'll help them achieve their financial goals.
That makes sense. So how do you end the meeting?
At some point, and we don't clock watch, so if the meeting runs over or runs short, that's okay. We have as much time. We schedule a lot of meetings, but we always leave time because this is incredibly important. But you don't want this to go on for 3 hours because that typically is not going to be good for either party. So at some point in the latter stages of the meeting, when I've collected my data and I feel like we've had a good exchange of information and that things have been open, and I feel like I would be interested in meeting with them a second time, and I feel that they would also be interested, I'm going to say something along the lines of, listen, what I would like to do, let's say, Lindy, you pretend to be the client. Lindy, what I would like to do is, take this information, reflect on our conversation. I want to go through my notes, and what I would like to do is schedule a second meeting with you now so that when you come back, I will be prepared to make some recommendations on some of the things we talked about, and I'll name them specifically: retirement planning, college funding, generating income, reducing risk, getting more and better customer service, whatever it is. I'll reference some of the things that were talked about and schedule the second meeting right there and then for them to come back. And then in that interim period, typically you and I, Lindy, we'll work on it together, going through the notes and putting together the proposal for the second meeting. So that's what I'll do. I'm going to assume that they want to meet it the second time. It's going to be very rare that I get to the end of the meeting and say, listen, I'd like us to schedule a meeting, and they say, I don't want to meet you. Because you had this open conversation beforehand, you should know where you stand at this point. More often than not, we're ready to schedule the second meeting.
Good. So the meeting's done. We get together. We work on the proposal. A lot of times we're doing, investment analysis and sometimes kind of looking at where they're at, income-wise and stuff, and getting together usually a list of stuff for them to work on.
Yes.
So we get into the second meeting, and we work on presenting that to them. What are some different ways that you present that to people to open them up and get some acceptance?
Sure. Before I answer that, let me just double back to something. At the point where I'm scheduling a second meeting, I want to reinforce much of what was reinforced in the early stages when we scheduled the first meeting, the initial meeting, as well as the early stages of the initial meeting. Say, listen, when you come back, we're going to lay out our proposal. If you're ready to move ahead, we'll have all the paperwork ready, and we could do that. Or you may want to take it home and think about it. That's okay. You don't have to decide anything on the second meeting, because again, I want the second meeting. It's still going to be, it'll be a little more formal because we're going to make specific recommendations, and we're going to get into a little bit more of the weeds on, we think you should do X, Y, and Z. But I still want it to be casual, conversational, informal, no pressure. So I'm going to want to set the expectation for the second meeting that we're going to make a proposal. And we're hoping they agree to one or more parts of the proposal, but to also reinforce if they're not ready for whatever reason, that's okay. We're in no rush. We'll go as slow or as fast as they want to do so that they don't feel uncomfortable that the second meeting they're going to end up in one of these 70s style sales meeting that is high pressure, beat you over the head to get you to say yes, because that's not what we're all about at any point in the business relationship. So I think that was worth mentioning. In terms of your question, what I will do, and you do this as well, is I'm going to redo my notes. Because the conversation, I may have taken different notes kind of out of order, but I'm going to take time after the meeting and rewrite my notes and reflect on the conversation. Some things I may not have even written down that I'm going to recall and get everything down on paper. I am, again, a little old-fashioned. This is typically going to be on a yellow legal pad paper. And then from there, we'll put together the early stages of the proposal. One of the primary ways we do that is something that we call internally the financial action checklist, which is sort of a to-do list. It's broken down by category, and these are things that we want to discuss with this potential client. Some of them are recommendations, but others are things that we want to suggest get researched or things to consider. So let me talk about some of the categories. One category is financial planning. An example of that is to construct a net worth statement, to come up with a budget, to do a retirement needs analysis. Those are some examples of what might fall under the financial planning section of the financial action checklist. Another is income tax planning. It might be to do an income tax projection for the current year, might be something like consider maximizing your 401k contributions or your retirement plan contributions. And sometimes it might be consult with your CPA on such and such. We might not be in a position Lindy, to make a recommendation. So on the financial action checklist, the to-do item is to have a consultation with their tax professional. We'll do one on estate planning. We want to make sure our clients have their wills and estates in place. We want to check to make sure that their beneficiaries on all their accounts are up to date and they have copies of them in writing. Should there be an emergency, you want to have all of that in place. Another category on the financial action checklist is often investment planning, and that could be any number of things relative to their investment portfolio. So after we rewrite the notes, we're going to begin to put together the financial action checklist, which is what we want to primarily review with the potential client in the second meeting. And sometimes there's more topics than others. Sometimes it's more income tax intensive. Sometimes it's more investment intensive. Other times more financial planning focused. That's okay, but we're going to put that together, and that's the first thing we really want to go through when the client comes in for the second meeting.
So it's more of an action checklist.
Yes.
Good.
Yeah, it's less just all recommendations, because a lot of the terminology in the financial action checklist will be like, we use the word consider, because we may not even know enough to make the recommendation. Like I mentioned before, we may have to check with the tax professional to make sure that we have all of our ducks in a row before making the recommendation. Sometimes we're waiting for documents from them, and depending on the documents we get from them, we'll determine what the ultimate recommendation is. So some of it's specific recommendations, and others it's things that we ought to work on in the early phase of the expected business relationship. And it provides a nice glimpse for the potential client to see that holistic approach you referenced earlier, Lindy, that we're not just trying to do investments, although we do that very well and bring a lot of competence to that area of financial planning, but we're going to look at lots of different areas to help the client across a wide spectrum in the financial planning process.
Good. So, I mean, it just seems like we're really looking out for the client, and I think we feel really good when we're presenting this checklist to clients or to potential clients. What is your experience with their normal reaction to that checklist?
It is unbelievably favorable. I did a meeting just a couple of days ago with our new client, and we've had a lot of success. We're recording this towards the end of 2019. We've had a lot of success this year attracting new clients from a variety of different sources. And the financial action checklist, I think, is one of the very best features of the relationship early going, because it gives both parties a roadmap as to what needs to get worked on. And by putting it in writing in that way and discussing all of these different categories and the items within each category up front, it really sets the stage for a productive business relationship, because when we do our first review with the client, we're going to pull out the financial action checklist and we're going to say, hey, we were able to do this, we were able to do that, we considered this but ruled it out, we thought about this but this year is not the right time to do it, that's for a year down the line. We'll go through that financial action checklist. So people really like it, and if they've had experience with other advisors, and many times they're coming to us looking for some type of an improvement, they really, really appreciate that. I mentioned this meeting a couple of days ago. That was exactly the case. They had an advisor, and as it turns out, a couple of years ago, they spoke with our client, Lindy, and our client gave our name to this person. And the person decided not to call us. They were going to go with someone else that was kind of already a family kind of thing or whatever. It was kind of the path of least resistance. But then a year or two later, they became very disappointed with the relationship. And then they went back to our client again, and they called us. And the relationship, they said that they were not being heard, that there was no proactive communication, and that it was mostly a one-way relationship. They weren't wronged per se, but they were looking for something more. And when we showed them the financial action checklist and presented the checklist, it became very clear to them that what they were looking for is what they were finding in the relationship they were about to start with us. And again, that's why they're our newest new client. And they know up front that when we do our next review with them, we're going to go through the financial action checklist, and we're going to need to work with them over these couple of months to attend to the financial action checklist so that they are as happy when we do the review as they are when they sign the paperwork to be our client.
Good. So you give them this financial action checklist, and really at that point, it's more like, here, this is yours, take it, this is how we think you should move forward, and they can choose to either work with us to accomplish that or take that and work on it themselves. What is the benefit of using us? I know this is a little salesy, I'm sorry, but what's the benefit of working with us to accomplish those goals?
I think it's exactly what we've talked about in this discussion, is that we want to help people. We have a lot of technical knowledge. We have a lot of credentials. We have a lot of years of experience. So those are some good starting points. Additionally, after 2 meetings now, we will have gotten to know the potential client. They will have gotten to know us, heard me answer questions, talk about financial topics, go through the different financial action checklists. They will have sized me up. They would have sized us up. And the advantage of going with us through this process, culminating in the financial action checklist and the rest of the proposal, is that if they feel comfortable moving forward, we have sown the seeds of a successful, long-term, fulfilling business relationship. It doesn't always work out that way, but the advantage is that we went through a really good process to begin the relationship, and that sets the stage for a good long-term business relationship, as I just said. And if the person is appreciative of working in partnership with someone across the financial planning spectrum, with insurance, estate planning, income tax planning, investment planning, if they're open to that, then we're probably going to be a good match for them. And at this point, after the 2 meetings, both parties should feel pretty good about it going into it. And if we do that, and we do that well, there's a good chance everybody gets what they want out of the deal.
Well, I think that's good. I mean, do you have any other comments or anything that you'd like to say about, the interview process, or things that you think people should know about us?
That's an interesting question. I think they should know that we try really hard. When you're dealing with investments and these different planning topics, much of it is out of our control. When you're talking about insurances, of course you want to get as much insurance as you can, but there are budgetary constraints. But if we knew when somebody was going to pass away or become disabled or need long-term care, the planning would be much easier. But there's so many unknowns and so many things that are outside of our control. We are sometimes judged harshly. It's the nature of the business. But what I would want people to know, if you're listening, is that we care a lot, and we try really hard to use our integrity and technical skills and our system of regular communication with clients to, as much as possible, increase the chances of successful outcomes and decrease the chances that mistakes are made. So I think I'd probably leave it there.
Okay.
So I think this was great, Lindy. You did a great job.
Thank you.
You're pretty good. You're like Larry King or Barbara Walters or something like that.
I wouldn't go that far.
For Larry King or Barbara Walters, for that matter. So listen, for people that are out there, if you haven't subscribed to the Simply Financial podcast already, please do so. Lindy and I would love that. Additionally, go to our website, www.elliottwealth.com, and at the site, you can find out more information about Lindy, myself, the rest of the team. And if you're not a client, you could sign up for complimentary consultation. We could either do it in person or remotely. And if you're not a client of ours already, we would love to speak with you. So thank you very much for listening. I will be back with you on the next episode of the Simply Financial podcast very soon. Thank you.
The views expressed are not necessarily the opinion of SagePoint Financial Incorporated and should not be construed directly or indirectly as an offer to buy or sell any securities mentioned herein. Investing is subject to risks, including loss of principal invested. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. No strategy can assure a profit nor protect against loss. Please note that individual situations can vary. Therefore, the information should be relied upon when coordinated with individual professional advice. Please note, the information being provided is strictly as a courtesy. When you link to any of the websites provided here, you are leaving this website. We make no representation as to the completeness or accuracy of the information provided at these websites, nor is the company liable for any direct or indirect technical or system issues or any consequences arising out of your access to your use of third-party technologies, websites, information, and programs made available through this website. When you access one of these websites, you are leaving our website and assume total responsibility and risk for your use of the websites you are linking to. Securities and advisory services are offered through SagePoint Financial Incorporated, member FINRA SIPC. Insurance services offered through Elliott Wealth Management, LLC, not affiliated with SagePoint Financial.
Simply Financial is part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can find Exvadio podcasts at exvadio.com/podcast, the Apple Podcasts app, iTunes Store, iHeartRadio app, Spotify, Stitcher, and wherever you find podcasts. So join us and stay informed and entertained.